This conference will now be recorded.
Can we start, Rakesh?
Yes, Vib.
Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, welcome back. So basically, we'll start off from where we left yesterday. Yesterday, we'll just have a quick recap of what we covered yesterday. And if in case you guys have any doubts with regards to what we covered yesterday, we can start off with that, and then we'll cover the rest of the topics what we have under the security tab today. So I'll just share my screen. Just let me know once it's visible to you guys. Okay, is it
Yeah,
visible?
we are able to see your screen, sir.
Okay, thank you. So basically, we started off with the security tab yesterday in Okta. We tried to understood what are all the different configurations of the different tabs we have under security. So we went on to see the general tab which we have which basically contains the general configuration settings in Okta. Which as an Okta developer or an Okta administrator, you might not have to configure every day, but it's like a one-time process. Whenever the environment is set up, you get the requirements from your client, and that's where you will be setting up all of that configurations here. Then we understood the health insights, where in Okta intellectually reads your security configurations every time, and at that particular instance it tries to help you with the information of the report, where it finds there could be a security breach in the coming future. So all the high critical tasks, or the moderate tasks, are being highlighted by Okta. And as an Okta administrator, if you can take an action upon those threats being highlighted by Okta, that would be great. So it would always protect your Okta environment. Then under authentication, we try to understand how do we create the password policy, how do we create the sign-on policies, password policies. Like under authentication, we try to understood what's a password policy, how do we create it, and how do we assign it. Then also the same for the sign-on policy, like what all combinations we can have when we are trying to create a sign-on policy. uh, what kind of a restriction we can put on a user when a user tries to log into an Okta environment. Then we enabled multi-factor yesterday. We enabled some of the multi MFA factors yesterday, and then we saw that how can we use multi-factor for all the people. We can actually bypass MFA for certain set of people and stuff like that. So that's where we are right now. Any doubts or anything you guys have before we move
So,
on to? Yeah.
yeah, multi-factor, right, sir? Multi-factor. So I want to disable the push, right? For example, so where I
Hmm.
can disable it.
If you want to disable, then if you go to Okta Verify and edit, and then enable push notification. Also, if you want to just disable it for a certain set of people, you can create your own policy. So maybe you can just have a policy name as disable push. Maybe just disable push again, and then maybe if you want to assign for certain set of people, like maybe for yourself. Okay, no, it has to be a group actually. So maybe if you want to unassign it for maybe admin group or maybe Okta training group. So and want to make it like a required option, but you just uncheck this option. So now a policy is created. Just have a rule, because whenever you create a policy, just create a rule. Exclude users no anywhere, and whenever the user signs in, create a rule. So now if anyone from our group, if we want to go ahead and do a multi-factor, I think we won't have to we won't get a push. We just have to enter the code to get into the environment. Let's try that. See, I'm not getting a push notification now. I'm getting to enter my code, and I have it scanned on my mobile. So I'll just have that code entered, and then I'll verify it, and then I'll be into the environment. So now what happens is, like, you see that there are a couple of policies inside MFA. Now I'm part of both the policies. Like, I'm part of this MFA policy as well. I'm part of this disable policy as well. But I should just make this as the first one. Yeah. So now, what should happen is that whenever, like, if I want to disable the push, so it will just come in, it will check, okay, if I'm part of this group, it will just, not ask me for to verify via push. And if this policy works for me, it will just ask me to verify via push. So both of them will work for me, and that's how we can disable it.
Okay, but we put a disable push is the first preference. That's why we don't see that push, right, sir?
Yeah.
So MFA policy won't work. Like, so we are already giving a priority to disable push.
Right.
So that's
Like,
why we won't.
policy will work for those people who are not part of this group, Okta training group. So, like,
Okay,
I am part of both the groups, that's why this is working for me. But if I would not have been part for this group, then MFA policy will work for the rest of the people.
okay, yeah, got it, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, guys, so we'll move on to the next, tabs with what we have in security. Now, we do not have much, we do not have like difficult stuff to cover. Mostly over here, we'll have this network. So yesterday also we did mention about network zones. So we'll just look into that before, we'll just cover these identity providers and the delegated authentication. There is nothing much practical over here. You just need to understand what these tabs mean. And I think delegated authentication, we already had a good discussion last time when we discussed JIT. That's exactly going to be the same. Nothing nothing more to cover in that, but yeah, we'll cover. So talking about the identity provider, so we have got, uh, like, I'll just refer a PPT over here, but also we'll try to understand from the end user's perspective, like from an Okta administrative perspective, what do we have to do. So basically, when we want to add an identity provider in Okta, so that means, like, we are going to authenticate an identity using that identity provider, and Okta would become our service provider then. See, now again, I'm telling you, uh, like, whenever we have worked with application integrations or anything, no, you would have remembered that you always used to call Okta as an IDP. I told you guys that, always consider Okta as an IDP, because Okta is that instance which always authenticate your, IDs. Because see, Okta is integrated with your Active Directory. Okta has its own universal directory. Okta is integrated with LDAP directory. So Okta had all the users in its environment. So that's why Okta always used to authenticate. So that's why Okta always used to authenticate, whereas the other, like, the applications, you used to leverage the services of those applications, right? So now there would be, change of roles. You are going to use Okta services, so that's why Okta becomes a service provider, and you are going to authenticate an identity using some other domain, or I mean some other identity provider. So that's what identity providers here are in Okta. So you can just go into the identity provider tab. This is like by default, an identity provider being created by Okta. I haven't created this. Like, by default they have it. So this is known as developer registration access. So there is a way to configure it. You can see that there is an IDP ID. This is the IDP of the, I mean, ID of the identity provider who is actually authenticating the IDs over here. Then you have the authorized URLs and redirect URLs. Now the stuff over here is like, the authorized URLs. Like, over here it's an OIDC configuration. See, like, whenever we did the concept of this IDP SP, no, we were saying these terminologies when we were working with the application integrations over here. Okay, when we actually had SAML or OIDC, At that point of time, we used to say that I'll just turn off this. Okay, at that point of time, we used to use these terminologies as uh, IDP and SP. Okay, so now the stuff is like over here, your IDP is configured by Okta itself. There is one IDP which is configured by Okta. If you don't want to use that IDP, you can use your own IDPs. You can just go ahead and add your own identity providers. So Okta gives you a lot of variety to add your identity providers. So that could be your Amazon, Apple, Discord, Facebook, GitHub, LinkedIn, Microsoft, OpenID Connect, Yahoo, something. And like, you can just connect to all of these. You can just add all of these to your, Okta as an identity provider. For example, if I just use Google as the IDP, so that means like Google can authenticate all the identities, and if Google feels that this is a legitimate identity, it can just redirect you to your Okta environment, and you can leverage the services of your Okta. Now what Okta can provide you as a services? Okta provides like your single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. So these are the services being offered by Okta. Okay, so now if Google decides that this is a legitimate identity, I am able to authenticate this identity, so that the user can go ahead and leverage the services of Okta. So maybe that user can go ahead and do a single sign-on to an application which is already in Okta. So right now, if a user wants to authenticate, I mean leverage the services of Okta, that is to do a single sign-on, user has to come into Okta, authenticate via Okta, and then leverage the services. But what we can do is we can just go ahead with Google, and we can just leverage the services of Okta. That a user can just not sign in to Okta using Google, and then leverage, or I mean use Okta's application to get into the applications actually. This is what the scenario is. Okay, so and why do we require this is because there are multiple organizations which use different authentications. Like Okta could be your main identity and access management tool on your environment, for your organization, but they still use multiple stuff. You might have seen that whenever you are creating a new account, you always get that option, sign in with Google, sign in with this that, or sign in with LinkedIn or something like that, right? So like what they do is like they give an option, you create an account on our platform, or if you don't want to create it, you go ahead and sign in with some of your other identities which you already have. So most of us has a Google identity. Even in Okta over here, no, if I just go back and I just sign out from here, so we get that option, sign in with Google. So over here, like this for not our environment, but for Okta's as a whole. Okta has Google as the IDP on their main Okta server. Like we are just using a tenant of the Okta, but this is like Okta server, like the main Okta server. And Okta has also added Google as their identity provider. That's why it gives me this option, sign in with Google. They haven't added anything else apart from Google as the identity provider. Otherwise, I would have got all the options like sign in with Google, sign in with LinkedIn, sign in with Microsoft and all. But they have just added Google as the IDP on their main Okta server. That's why I get this option. And when I try to sign in, so Google actually authenticates me. Okta doesn't authenticate me. And then I get into the Okta to leverage any services of Okta. So that's what the plan is. So I'll just enter my code again. Okay. So yeah. So if we go back to identity providers, so that's where. So now, for us to actually add an identity provider, we just cannot, go ahead and add any identity provider. You know, for us to add any identity provider, like these are all the options which Okta is giving us, that if you want to add other identity providers, you can just go ahead and do all of this stuff. You can add it on your own. But now if I want to add Google only, right? So I need to do some configuration settings. So like over here, like I can just give a client name, client ID, client secret. Now this is something I have to get it from Google. So like if you just go and see the view the Google setup instructions, so from here you'll just understand how do you actually have to add Google as an identity provider. So if we go to this security identity providers, we just need to add identity providers and then select Google. This is exactly what we did right now. We went in over here to the security IDP. We just added a Google as an identity provider, selected Google as an identity provider to be added, and then we landed onto this particular screen. Then they are saying that just enter a name for the identity provider and paste the app ID or the client ID you obtained from the IDP provider in the previous section. So now the thing is, like, we haven't got the identity provider. I mean, we do not have this app ID or the client ID yet. Okay. Yeah. So they are asking us to paste the client ID and the secret ID, and I think they are referring us to this particular thing. But we do not have any client ID and a client secret. Okay, we have it. Okay, we know we don't have this. We need to get the client ID and a client secret to actually go ahead and paste it over there. This is something which we require from Google side, this client ID and client secret, because this is going to be an OIDC integration with Google, wherein we are saying that Okta, you become service provider, and Google, you become identity provider. So that's why we require, you remember whenever we used to do with that OIDC integration, we used to give our client ID and our client secret to the application. Now this would be the other way around. We want Google's client ID and Google's client secret to be entered on our environment, so that we said, okay, Google, you use your own authorization server to authenticate the users, and I as a service provider trust you to trust you to actually go ahead and authenticate the users, and then I can just allow those users to leverage the services whatever I have in Okta. So that's why this is something to be provided by Google. We don't have it yet, so we just cannot complete it. But that's how the process is. Like if you just see the setup instructions here, yeah, over here. So you will get to know, like this is something, if in like for all the identity providers, you for like Amazon, Apple, Discord, everything whatever we were seeing here, there are step-by-step process which we need to follow. And see, whenever you create an application in Amazon or in Google, you'll get that identity, I mean you'll get that client ID and a client secret. So we will have to go ahead and create an application in Google first, and then only we'll be able to use that. So this is what we require actually. And yeah, so once we have that, I think we'll be able to do that. So maybe this is where we have the Google Developer Console, and over here we can actually go ahead and create an application wherein we'll get that client ID and a client secret. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. So once you publish the app over here, once like okay, yeah. So once we'll have the app ready, actually we just have to, create an application at the identity provider. So that's why we need to go to Google and create an application over there. There would be, we'll have to create a Google project using these kind of instructions. And under the authorized redirect URLs, we'll have to use the URI which will be provided by Okta. And once we'll have the Okta redirect URI being added over there in the Google, you'll have the client ID and the client secret generated. And once you have that client ID, client secret generated, you'll have to come back and add that client ID and client secret over here. So now that would complete your Okta OIDC authentication. And once you have that, Google would start acting as your as a provider. I mean as a service, as a identity provider, and you can use Okta as your service provider. So that's how it is. Like, any doubts you guys have, it could be a little bit confusing, but if in case it's getting a little bit confusing, you can just come up, we can just repeat what we have just discussed.
Can you just repeat once again, please?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what we are trying to tell here is that currently, see, Okta is acting as your identity provider, and you have always used applications as your service provider. Any application, like whatever applications we integrated over here, right? Everything was your service provider, and Okta acted as an identity provider for all those applications. This is an OIDC application. So what we did was, like, we just went into this application, created this application, created a client ID, a client secret, and then we used to provide this client ID and the client secret to the application, and then the application had to configure this at their end, and then finally we used to test that whether it's working or not. Now the tables are going to change. Now Okta is saying, I am going to become that service provider, and I need an identity provider. I am not going to authenticate the IDs right now. So what we are trying to do is, like, we are just going back to Okta now. We are going to the identity providers, and we are giving Okta, and like, Okta is helping us with these set of identity providers. It is saying you can use Amazon as an IDP, you can use Apple as an IDP, you can use Google as an IDP. So, like, whatever identity provider we want, like, so we can just add that identity provider. So if I made my mind that I want to make a Google IDP, make Google as an identity provider on my Okta environment. That means, like, Google is going to authenticate the IDs, and I am going to just leverage the services of Okta. I am just going to, if in case Okta is providing single sign-on to certain applications, I am just going to use that single sign-on. I'm not going to do anything else. So that's what it means. Like, if in case I authentication part will be done by someone else, and that someone else would be that identity provider wherein we are, whatever we are adding. So, like, for example, if I just want to add Google, I can just do it. There is a set of instructions provided on Okta's document. How do we add Google as an identity provider? Because, see, most of the stuff we have to do at the application end also. Application, if whenever we did an OIDC integration, we were the Okta was the environment which used to generate that client ID and client secret, because Okta was the IDP at that point of time. Now your Google is going to become an IDP, so your Google has to generate that client ID and client secret, no, and that has to be entered somewhere on the Okta's environment, because it is going to go, like, people are going to go to Okta with that client ID and client secret, and they will validate it only if they have it. Okay, so why do we used to provide that to the application team? Because application team used to go to the Okta at that point of time, saying I have this client ID and client secret, and then Okta's authorization server used to validate it. Now it's going to be the other way around. Like, Okta, like, Google people will come to Okta saying that I have this. Sorry, Okta people will go to Google saying I have this client ID and client secret, and Google will actually validate it. Okay, yes, whether it's a correct credential or not. If it is correct, then only it will allow you to get into the system, or leverage any of the services of Okta. So that's what the plan is. So we just need to follow these steps in order to get into the environment of, I mean, in order to use Okta as a service provider, and like whatever you are adding as that of an identity provider. So that's what it is.
How we select the identity provider? It's depend on the client requirement or it's our
Yeah,
choice.
exactly. Totally on the client requirements. Yeah, like over here you see that I just show you guys, right? Like over there in Okta we get an option of sign in with Google. So someone would have taken the decision that only we require Google. We don't want to add all others. Like people could have gone for maybe LinkedIn. People could have gone for Microsoft, but they decided only we stick with Google. So that's a decision someone.
Sorry, we couldn't hear.
Oh, is it? Hello?
It's
Yeah,
breaking. Your voice is
the
breaking.
voice is breaking. It's
Some
get double.
background. My noise is breaking, is it?
Now it is okay.
Yeah, I think there is some background noise from somewhere, so that's why it could be the reason. Okay, so what I was telling is that over here in Okta, someone would have taken that decision, right? That okay, like we just want to stick with Google as an identity provider. Like I'm not talking about my instance, I'm talking about Okta as a tool which has added Google, Okta as a product which has added Google as its identity provider. By default, Google is the identity provider of Okta. So someone would have taken that. So if in my environment I want something else to be integrated or added as an identity provider, it's like the management or someone has to take the decision. We as an implementers, we just have to implement it. And later, if we become the architects in Okta, then we have to take that decision that what type of what type of actually the identity provider we want to go ahead with. So these are all called as social logins over here. These are all social identities where all of us can have an account. So that's why we call them as social logins. Some might want to go ahead with Facebook, some might want to go ahead with LinkedIn, some might want to go ahead with Google or PayPal. Now the thing is, like there are APIs which are going to help you to integrate it. Like these are not for free of cost. Like Google might be for free of cost, but Facebook, LinkedIn or PayPal might pay you. Like you might have to pay PayPal to in order to integrate PayPal as an identity provider, because PayPal is basically your payment services. Okay, so now like Google is having the exposed APIs on internet. Exposed APIs by, I mean, like for free they are having their APIs available on internet. So that's why you can just go ahead and create an application in Google and use that client ID, client secret. But over here it's not that easy. You cannot just go into an account and create. For it to have it, we might have to pay PayPal to certain amount of credits, and then they'll allow us to do this. So people don't want to spend money, or people want to spend money for certain things. So that's where we just have to make the decision according to the requirement what we have, and then accordingly we can take that decision which identity provider we want to go ahead with. But most of the times you'll just see Google as the identity provider being added on your system, nothing else. But like that doesn't mean that you won't be able to add anything else. You can, but like mostly you'll see Google. And this is a topic which might not be asked much in an interview, but you should have a basic knowledge that Google has this capability of adding others as an identity provider. So if someone do ask you in an interview, like what kind of an identity provider, or what kind of stuff have you ever worked with identity providers, so just you can answer them like that you have just worked with Google as an identity provider, or just tell them like they might be just interested in to understand the theoretical knowledge of identity providers. Because trust me, nobody actually integrates identity providers, because Okta is a very strong IDP on its own, and Okta already has a very high licensing cost. So people don't want to spend much of their money on now adding IDPs also. So when Okta itself can do all of that stuff, they might not want to go ahead and add something else which is again not free of cost. So that's why Google is kind of a very common example over here, but like LinkedIn is not free of cost, and PayPal so definitely it's not. So that's why we just don't do all of these integrations. But if you want to, we can. Like that's not an issue. So yeah, that's pretty much it from the IDP side.
So what is the advantage to, so, in the practical, so we don't do this identity providers. So like if we add it, is there any advantage like,
Yes, advantage is there definitely. See, because like right now you'll see, I am using this, most of the environments you would have seen, not just with Okta I'm talking about whenever you install a new application, most of the times you would be seeing sign in with Google. And you just don't create your account in that particular application. You just say, okay, I have my account with Google, I don't want to create it because it will take time, like I have to enter my first name, last name, this. I don't want to do all of that. I'll just go ahead and sign in with Google. So at that time you're using Google as an identity provider. You're not creating that account in that particular application you wanted to go in. So that means you have an account because of Google. You are just leveraging the services of that application. You are not allowing that application to actually authenticate you. Never ever you'll use your login credentials to enter. Every time you'll have to use Google, your Gmail ID to authenticate and get into it. And same thing, I'm using it over here. I do not have an ID and a password for this particular Okta environment. I always, do sign in with Google, and I already have, a session with my Gmail ID on my environment or laptop. So I don't have to, I never enter a username and a password. I in fact do not have a username or password here in Okta, because Google is always authenticating me. So that's the the practical use of this. Like if you want to add multiple social logins, like you want to give that liberty to people. If you want to have an account in Okta, that's great. If you don't want to have an account, you still want to get into the system using your other ID, like LinkedIn maybe, or like your Google, then just click on that. If we have that added on our environment, we'll let you in. So that's how it is.
so in the like Okta login page itself, like it will ask like if you have a Google, like so enter Google user ID and password,
Right.
enter.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, then. I think that's it. So apart from that, next we have the delegated authentication. This is like, guys, exactly the same what we discussed last time. Delegation is like, distributing or just dividing your roles and responsibility. So delegated authentication, if we just, want to configure delegate authentication, we'll be redirected to that same directory integrations tab. Currently, we do not have any, delegate an active directory or an LDAP directory for which we can enable delegate authentication. But that day we saw it on the other environment that like if you want to enable JIT, or if you want active directory to actually come in and authenticate a user instead of Okta, if Okta does not have an account of that particular user, you can use a delegate authentication concept. So that's exactly the same what we have. Like if you have your directories configured, you will be able to see it over here in this tab. And you can just enable the delegate authentication, or you can just disable the delegate. Also, there is no hard and fast rule that you have to do it from security delegate authentication only. Even if you have a directory integration done, you can just go to the directory over there, as we have seen last time in our other environment. You can just go in over there, and from there also you have the option to either enable the delegate authentication or disable it. And that's it. Like you just have to enable or disable it based on your enabling or disabling of the delegate authentication. Okta can take that decision whether it allows JIT or not, like that just in time provisioning. So nothing much to cover here. Delegate, like if you guys have any doubts with regards to these two tabs, we don't have much to cover here under delegate authentication, because we have already done this before under directory integration. But yeah, if in case like you want to ask anything for IDP and delegate, and then you can ask before we move on to the network tab.
So so in integration, right, sir, we check the tick box JIT, and we check the like delegated authentication, right? So once we select there, and we need to come here and we need to do anything in the delegated account.
Like, you can either do it from here or you can directly do it from this directory integration. Okay, and whatever you'll do here, it will just sync it over here on this screen also. Like it's like, just they are, Okta is like, dividing its services into small functions, and that's why you see, a lot of tabs there. Like a lot of tabs wouldn't make sense, like, even if you are creating an application and you are doing some profile mapping, you don't have to go to directory and go to this profile editor. You can directly do it from here also. But since Okta has made it, like, has indented in such a way that they provide you, all the features available with them in a different tab. And so that's why either you can do it from that particular screen or you can do it from here. Both will be in sync every time. Like if you enable it from here, if you come back to this particular tab, you'll see that it would be enabled here as well. So that's how it is.
Yeah, got it, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, then next we have the networks tab. This is, probably something to understand right now. So last time, over here, while we were yesterday when we were, looking at, to add a new password policy, sorry, not password policy, but in, if we go to the sign-on policy, when we were trying to add a new sign-on policy or a rule, right? Over here, we did see that, if a user's IP is, and we used to select anywhere always. But there are zones also in Okta, okay, whether it is in zone or not in zone, okay. So that's what, like, now we want to understand what is the zone concept here in Okta. So if you go back to the networks tab, and if you add a zone, so if you want to add an IP zone, first of all, there are two IPs, okay. One is a gateway IP and the other is the proxy IP. So your gateway IP is something like, which is like your local, a device on your network. I mean, like, what is an IP? An IP is basically some device, right? Or an identity provider, like, internet provider it is, but like, something which is actually having that meaning wherever you are going. Like my laptop is having one IP address. Okay, there would be like your laptops or your devices running, your mobile phones or everything will have a IP address. Okay, so there would be a device on a network that will be actually routing the local traffic to the other networks. Okay, so like, there would be one network. Suppose I am using my Wi-Fi to communicate with other networks on internet. So that's like the gateway IP. My device IP would become the gateway IP. Okay, so that's how it is. Now the thing is like, and then we have the proxy IP. Proxy IP is something like, suppose you have an Okta server that is having an IP, and you make another IP which will stand in front of the Okta server. So whatever traffic is coming should have come to Okta, that will first go to, that proxy IP, that will filter out the traffic and then will send it to Okta. So kind of, a bodyguard, like, so it will just filter out. If there is some false traffic coming into your Okta environment, you can just filter out that traffic. And I'm just giving you an example of Okta environment. I'm just talking about in general what is a proxy IP. So proxy IP is basically, someone standing in front of the main IP. So like, I have the main IP of my system. I just added one of the proxy, so it will just stand in front of my main IP. It will just see, okay, what all traffic is coming. It will filter out the traffic and then accordingly route back to the, or redirect it to the main IP. Okay, so these are, the two IPs which we have. One is the gateway IP and the other is the main IP, I mean the proxy IP. So gateway IP, I'm again repeating, it's basically a device on a network which is going to route the or redirect the local traffic to the other network. So whatever, like if I am on my home Wi-Fi right now, and if I want to communicate with Okta's network, so that's like, a gateway traffic being routed, because it's like a local traffic from my network being routed to the Okta's network. So that's a gateway. Now, a proxy IP is something that I have an Okta server or a Google server, whatever it is, they have an IP, and I'm tricking the other people, like I as an user want to communicate with Google IP, but Google has added a proxy IP. So my traffic will go to that proxy IP, which is standing in front of the main IP of Google. It will just check whether it's a legitimate traffic to move to, redirect it to Google or not. If it is like a malicious traffic, it won't redirect only. So Google is not going to be impacted. And if it finds it's a legitimate, it will just redirect the IP, I mean the traffic to the main IP. So that's what the concept of these two IPs are. Now the thing is like, if see over here, I can either whitelist a IP or I can just blacklist an IP. Okay, so I can just maybe give like test zone or maybe north zone somewhere. And if I should have the IP address, this is something which the network team will be providing. Okay, currently, like, add your own current IP address. So like, Okta is checking what is the IP address of my network, and it is saying me add this. Like, if you'll just go into your network, like over here, you'll see that you'll see something different. That is going to be your IP address. Okay, so if I just add this, and I do not have trusted proxies right now, so I'm not adding anything, and if I just click on save, so now I have this on my system. Okay, so I can either whitelist it or I can either block it. Okay, so if I just go back, so currently this IP is whitelisted, but I can just block also. Okay, so this will just block everything. This is not going to anything over here, like this IP is going to be blocked now. Okay, so I cannot disable it because I am inside it right now. If I just disable it, no, then I can never be able to log into Okta again, because it will always blacklist my IP. It will not allow me to enter into the system. So that's why it says that, from where the request is being made, we cannot blacklist it. But if you guys try to, blacklist my IP, you can do it, and then I cannot get into the system. So I won't do it right now, but like that's how the process is. So what happens is, like, the practical purpose of this is like, you are going to, maybe you are in US and you are going to work with Europe people. Under Europe, you might be working with different clients, and you want that, okay, Germany people should be able to log in, France people should be able to log in, but you want Netherlands people not to log in. There is some requirement. So at that point of time, what you guys can do is, you will be provided with all set of IPs by your network team. You just have to come in and add those IPs here and block those IPs. So any person from Netherlands trying to get into the system, they won't be able to do it. So that's how it works. Any people coming from India, and if you have whitelisted or blacklisted, if you have blacklisted, then India people cannot log in. So that's what the concept of this network zone is all about. We just need to add those zones, and it's very simple. Whatever is the zone name, this will be the gateway IPs, and this would be your proxy IPs. So proxy IPs are something you will be provided by your network team. Gateway IPs, again, you just have to add it. And now once you have this zone, no, like for example, I just added, and I just I'm just going to add my IP just to help you see, and I just save it. Okay, or I have this north zone, sorry, why do I have to do this? Okay, now if I go back to the authentication, no, and if I go back over here on the sign on, and I just like change the rule. Now if I just go, like maybe zone, so I can just select my zone. So I have this north zone. If I would have added some other zones as well, like we can have a Germany zone, we can have a South Africa zone, we can have a France zone, and then accordingly you guys can check that if users IP is coming up from this, then you have to take this action. If users IP is not in zone, like in this zone, if they are not there, you have this option of not in zone as well. So then you have to do this. So as the text suggests us, like whatever, we can take the appropriate action, or we can create appropriate policies for such things. So that's what this network is all about. Okay, yeah, any doubts, guys, with regards to this thing?
So whatever IP we enter, those IPs only we are allowing, right?
Yes.
So if we enter a proxy IP, those IPs we won't allow, right? Filters.
No, that doesn't mean that you are allowing only that particular IPs, but that means that you are trusting those IPs. And now if you see, now you have, for example, like I added North Zone, someone else added East Zone. Okay, now what we are trying to say is that we have got couple of zones here. So over here, if we want to add some policies, no, whatever, like if we don't have these zones created now, like if we are not blacklisting any IP, that means all the IPs are allowed in Okta. By default, all are allowed. But now we are just segmenting it. Like this is our East zone, this is our West zone, this is our North zone, this is our South zone. And I want to create policies based on every particular zone. Like I want people to get into Okta, but like each zone should be should be configuring multi-factor, should be doing multi-factor. West zone should not do multi-factor. So I have to create two policies in such a way that West zone is allowed to do is have to do multi-factor, and South zone is having that liberty that they want to do multi-factor or they don't want. It's their wish. So I'll just create two policies in such a way that West zone can do it and South zone have to do it. So that's why I am creating zones so that I can use these IPs in my segmentation, or in my creation of policies, different policies which I'm going to create according to the requirement. So if I'm blacklisting, that means I cannot use that IP now. I mean that those IPs are restricted in Okta. But if in case I'm adding IPs, that means like I have some requirement in Okta wherein I have to write policies for which I need to have different zones with me. According to the zones, I'll be writing a policy. So at that point of time, I'll just come in and add all the IPs and create different zones, and then I'll go back and create my MFA policies or authentication policies or whatever it is.
Yeah, got it, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, then next we have the behavior detection. This is again pretty much simple. See what happens over here is like there is a very good feature available by Okta which allows Okta to detect the behavior of the end user. Okay, so now you see that there is a new city, there is a new country, new device, new geolocation, new IP, new state and velocity. Okay, and if you just go back here, there is a location. So this is your locations. There is a device. This is your device. There is a IP. This is your IP, and then there is a velocity, which is this. Okay, so by default, you will see that Okta has added everything. If you want to customize it, you can just go ahead and customize it. If you want to add on your own, maybe location or something, so you can add it on your own as well. That's not an issue. Okay, now what is this behavior detection? Behavior detection is that whenever a user is trying to get into the environment of Okta is detecting the behavior of that user, whether it's a legitimate user or it could be a hacker. See, Okta is a machine, so Okta doesn't understand Okta is not seeing the user in person. So Okta has to detect whether the person who is actually trying to get into is a legitimate or he is not a legitimate person. So that's why there are different behaviors or the criteria on which Okta decides whether this is a a legitimate user or not. And this is something by default of the recommended approach which Okta has provided. You can always go ahead and change this. That's not an issue. But yeah, I mean this is a recommended approach by Okta that if a person is going to be in a new city, so then it is going to evaluate against last 20 authentication. So the thing is, like for a particular city, if there is a location granularity is a city and evaluate against 20 authentication. Then again for the new country, evaluate against 10 authentication. Now for a city, you can you can just travel to one city to another easily. And so what happens is, like maybe right now you are maybe in some maybe in Seattle, tomorrow you are in some like maybe New York. So cities or somewhere states are changing, so it will understand, okay, I have to give this user 20 authentications to actually understand whether this user is a legitimate or not. But within like more than 30-40 authentications, and users city is changing every time. Okay, so that's where Okta will start understanding that there is something malicious, there is something wrong with this user, like, or a country, like, in last 10 authentications, every time your country is different, that cannot happen. I mean, like, you can always increase this, like it could happen that you are a very frequent traveler and you don't use Okta much, but there is a time span also, right? Like you cannot visit 10 countries in 5 days, right? So until unless you are on a tour, and if you're on a tour, why are you supposed to use Okta every day or 10 times a day? So that's why. So it's like just detecting your behavior, and against once it will detect your behavior, it will try to understand whether it's a legitimate user or not, based on the configuration settings what we have under the behavior detection. So like you can have a geolocation wherein it will authenticate against again 20 authentications within a radius of 20 kilometers. Then for a new IP, whenever there is a new IP added, it will evaluate against your 50 authentications, or a new state, or a velocity. So this is 805 kilometers per hour. So if you are moving, or if you are changing your, I mean, if you're authenticating again to Okta, and you are moving with a speed more than 805 kilometers per hour, that means that there is something malicious. It won't allow you to, like, your aeroplanes or your airplanes are going to have a speed of around 1200 kilometers per hour, but you cannot use Okta on your while traveling, right, in a flight. So, and apart from that, like you cannot have a speed of that, like 805 achieved on your metro trains, or your own personal vehicles. So even like this is like pretty much high, but if in case you are changing your locations, or you are moving more than 805 kilometers per hour, so it will just detect that there is something malicious happening. And this usually happens with hackers do it. If you would have seen, like this is basically whenever the cops are trying to trace an IP, then and there the location of that IP is changed. If that person was being traced in India, then and there, like in North India, then and there that person will go to Sri Lanka somewhere, then from Sri Lanka, Myanmar, or to Australia somewhere. So like that is just making fool of the making fool of the system. Like they are just showing that they are here there, but they are moving at a pace of more than 1500 or 2000 kilometers per hour. So that's why we have this, like if you are moving at more than 805 kilometers per hour, that means like there is some issue, and it will just detect that behavior, and it won't allow you. So you can just add your own behaviors also. You can add a velocity. Maybe you can say that it should be somewhere like 1200 kilometers per hour. You can just add it. Whatever you see here, that's how you can just add it, or you can just edit them. But these are all the behavior detections, like be it a new city, be it a new country, be it a new device, be it a new geolocation, you are being evaluated by your past authentication. If you, in case everything feels right, then Okta doesn't do anything. But if in case there is some malicious activity being happening on Okta environment, it will take the appropriate action, and it will block the user. So that's what it is. Any doubts, anything you want to discuss? Although this is a little bit theoretical but interesting topic, because this sometimes this is being asked in an interview, because what do they ask is like they try to understand that you are changing your location, so how will you let Okta know you are doing something, and like a user is in US today, to India tomorrow India. So can you put some restriction that that user cannot log into Okta for more than 8 hours if the locations are changed within 24 hours? So that's where you'll just give them an approach saying that this is where we have the behavior detection in Okta, wherein Okta can understand whatever things are happening, locations are changing, or devices are changing, or states are changing, and accordingly it will take the action. So that's why a little bit theoretical but an interesting topic.
About the velocity,
Yeah.
so the 805 kilometer means how they will detect, on what basis? They will detect with the IP, right?
Yes, I mean they are actually going to see like if in case we go to the reporting tabs now over there we have everything being reported. So for example like yes, my network is definitely going to change, right? I cannot be on the same network for 805 kilometers if I have traveled in an hour. So they are going to based on not only an IP but there is a velocity concept also. Like we have an IP concept now, then there is a velocity concept also, wherein like that is itself an attribute. So if you're traveling from one place to another, and so it will understand, okay, at what pace you traveled at 150 kilometers per hour, so it will keep that value of velocity as 150. So if you are changing your locations, so based on what time you took, the velocity is calculated, and accordingly if that value is going to be as 805 as maximum what we have given. So if that value goes above 805 based on the distance traveled upon time, then it says that this is something malicious.
Okay,
Yep.
got it.
Okay. Anything else, guys, before we move on to the administrators?
So all this criteria will be decided in the Okta team, means the
Right.
in the policy. I mean,
Right. I mean, yeah, I mean, like you can directly come in and add that stuff over here, whatever. Like currently we have like if there is a new city being added, then 20 authentication evaluate. You can change it to 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever you want. But like by default, Okta is recommending 20. So usually these are default settings which are not being changed much. There could be one or two settings which you might come in and configure, and because that might be critical for your environment, but mostly everyone keeps it as default only. But yeah, I mean, like whatever you have to change is something that will be decided by the architects, Okta architects, or the client for whom you are implementing it. Okay, anything else, guys? Okay, then we'll move on to the administrators tab. This is basically, we just had a, look to this administrators tab yesterday, and we try to understand a little bit. We'll just go more into deep now. We'll see what all different types of administrators we have in Okta. I'll share this PPT with you today. So, whatever topics we have covered, like the identity provider, network, everything is, in a detailed description over here. So you can just refer to this PPT, and if in case you have any doubts we can just discuss tomorrow. So yeah, so we want next we have the administrators. So we have different types of administrators, and I'm just going to talk about the main administrators or the administrators which we are going to work with. So we are the super administrators in Okta right now, and that's the highest level of privileges a user can have in Okta. Like if you're a super admin, you can do anything and everything in Okta. So that's like you have full access to perform all the administrative tasks and the permission tasks sets in Okta. So nothing, you don't have to look anything for, you don't have to take anyone's help. You can do anything and everything on your own. So if you are a super admin. Now, if then we have, the second level of access, or the second highest level of access is the organization admin or an org admin. So they can perform most of the organization wide settings, most of the things like I mentioned yesterday, most of the things organizational admins can do. There are only certain things which they cannot do. So they can perform all the management tasks for the users, groups, mobile policies and devices, but they cannot perform any application management task. That's true. Application management task, I'm not saying that they cannot go ahead and integrate an application. They can integrate applications, but they cannot do any application management task. Like they cannot add an authorization server. They cannot go ahead and like over here, if I go back to Okta, if I'm an org admin and I go to security and API, so over here I this will be disabled for me. I cannot edit it. Okay. I cannot add an origin over here, this will be disabled for me. Okay, then if I go to profile sources, or if I go to maybe yeah, as an org administrator I cannot add a directory. So there are certain things like the application management which I cannot perform as an org admin. Okay, now there's a user administrators. They can create users, deactivate users, and reset passwords. So that's the only thing they can do. Okay, they can either create users, deactivate the users, delete. I mean, they can just play around with users tab, and they will only have this particular tab in Okta. They won't have everything else. Okay, they won't be able to see applications or security or anything else. They'll have just user tabs in Okta that is under directory. So that's what the user role can do in Okta. Then you'll have an application admin. They can run reports and manage profile information. They can view users and groups but not modify either. They can manage information on applications which they are assigned access to. So they can actually we are going to assign an application to them as an application admin. Like for example, I have 5 applications created in Okta, so out of 5 I'll just make 3 as an application admin, like an application admin with 3 applications. So I make one of you as an application admin, and I assign 3 applications to you. So you have application admin rights for those 3 applications. So you can change the configurations of that applications. You can just view the groups or the people. You cannot change them. You cannot add users to the group. You cannot delete users from the group. You can just view them. So that's like you can just basically play around with the application configuration over here, but you cannot change anything on the user side. If you want to assign people, you can assign it, but if you want to remove people from this particular group, like we had some group, then you cannot remove people from that group. You can just assign people, do configuration settings, and play around with those applications. Apart from that, you won't have any privileges. So that's like an application admin. You have a read only, like this user, this access allows you to have all access to all the tabs but do nothing with anywhere. So you can just go ahead and all of this will be disabled for you. Everything will be disabled. You'll have everything enabled, but in a way everything would be disabled. You can just have the privileges to go ahead and read it. You cannot edit it, you cannot do anything. You can just, okay, this is our client ID, okay, this is disabled. This is our domain, this is disabled. Everything would be disabled wherever you can edit right now. But the thing is, like, you can read everything, so you'll have access to our environment. So that's like a read only admin. Then you have a mobile admin, like who has access to the mobile related permission sets and has access on non-mobile permission sets as well. So basically whatever permission sets you have, you can have you can have a mobile administrator who can have uh, like that particular administrator also has a very restricted permission. So now if I go to the security and administrator, and if I go over here like an admin, and I want to add, suppose like myself, although I am a super admin, but let's suppose I want to add, just to show you. So over here, these are all the different types of administrators we have. API access management administrator is like you can play around with the API stuff. Like you can create a token, you can just use that token somewhere else, play around with the whatever is this API tab now, that is your API access. Then your application administrator we discussed. Group administrators are those people who can have access only to the groups. They can only add people to the groups. They can remove people from the group, so they can just have those group administrator. Group membership administrator is basically specific to a particular group. You have 5 groups in Okta, you just wanted to have the group membership administrator being for maybe admin group. So then only, so you will just have those admin group permissions. You won't have permissions for other 4 groups. So that's like your group admin member administrator. A help desk administrator is like you get some requests. You remember we did that add an application, you used to get a request. So that is basically your help desk administrator. You cannot do much over there. Then org admin we discussed, read only admin we discussed, and there is a report administrator who can just play around with this tab. That particular administrator will have no access apart from the report tabs. So that's all, that's all what we have under the administrator tabs in security. Like this is pretty much you'll more understand once, and only the one important thing for you to keep in mind is only a super admin can, perform these activities. If he, like an org admin cannot give permissions to you as a read only admin or any other. Only super admin can perform or give permission or make an admin, any other administrator. Like org admin is the second most highest privileges in Okta, but still that particular admin does not see this administrator's tab. Like this tab itself is disabled for that particular user. So you, if you are any administrator apart from super admin, you won't see this particular tab in Okta. Okay, so only super administrator tabs can come in and, assign permissions or change your role. Apart from that, nothing you can do from Okta. I mean, nothing, you do not have privilege. Any other administrator do not have privileges to assign any administrative access to any other user if they are not super admin. Only super admin administrators have the highest level, and only they are the ones who can, actually go ahead and assign users different admin levels permissions. Okay, so that's what it is. And basically, you'll see that, you'll understand more of it once you start, because you won't remember each and every administrative permissions what they are right now. But like as the name suggests, like you can just keep in mind that super admin highest, org admin second highest, and then, you have basically report admins, read only admins, group admins, application admins, and stuff like that, who are going to, basically have permissions of what the name suggests. So that's how it goes. Okay, anything you want to ask on this under administrators?
I think we are good.
Okay. One last thing is the API. We have already discussed this API when we did OIDC. I mean, and the API stuff when we did, use Postman. So, you can see that you have your, tokens created here in Okta. And, you can see that most of the tokens are not being used in last 30 days. So, you have the expiration date coming for these tokens like 9th of April, 8th of April, and stuff like that. But like if you'll just use these tokens anytime right now or anywhere, so these tokens would be reactivated. So then, the date would become 30 days after that. So it might have been used last on 9th of March, and hence it shows 9th of April as the next date. Like if you use today, then 30 days after today it will show as the next expiration date. But yeah, and authorization servers, we did mention under OIDC that we can create an authorization server, and what all stuff we have under authorization server. And then we have the trusted origins concept here in Okta. So you can have a request being see, currently I'm on this domain, like this is my domain. Whatever you see after HTTPS, no, this is my domain. And if there is a request coming in from some other domain, like maybe from SharePoint, maybe from Google, maybe from LinkedIn, that becomes a different domain. So whenever there is a different domain concept, no, like if the request is coming from the same domain, then we don't have to do anything. But if a request is coming from some other domain, we need to add the origin over here, because if in case you are using a JavaScript code somewhere, if in case you are using somewhere the JavaScript code, you don't have to use, but like sometimes, like there is a development team which is doing it. So at that point of time, if they are using your domain, then you also need to add your domain over here. Like maybe a SharePoint team working with you, so a SharePoint team might say that Okta team, we are using your domain, just help us with your domain. So at that point of time, you also have to tell them, SharePoint team, you also give your domain, because I'll have to add that domain over here. Because otherwise, if you're trying to get into my domain without me entering your domain over here, then it will be an issue. And this is only if you are using a JavaScript. Although you would have seen, we have seen a lot of different domain requests being entered, like application wise, these were all different domains only, they were not on the same domains. None of the applications were on the same domain. So this is only for that, wherever you are using a JavaScript code or a React code, or code, like you are not using browser to do that request, you are using a code to make a request. At that point of time, you need to add an origin, otherwise you don't need to add any origin. So that's basically it on the API also. and that actually covers our all of the topics whatever we have in security. I'll be sharing this PPT with you today, so you can just go ahead do this PPT and come up with your doubts tomorrow. We have got a now, we don't have much remaining. We have workflows, although this is not free of cost in the, and this actually comes in the advanced Okta training as well. This is not something we cover in the basic training, but I'll be giving you a quick overview, a theoretical session on the workflows. Then we'll have the reporting, I think one more class for this, and that would be it. Like, I think maximum 3 classes from here, and we'll be completing with this Okta course. And then if in case we can have one class wherein you can come up with doubts or any queries, or anything with regards to Okta you want to understand or prepare, we can have one more session for that. So that would be it. And yeah, I mean, like, you can just go through the PPT today. These all the topics are there in this PPT, so you can, if you want something, if you don't understand something, just let me know and we can discuss tomorrow, or anything if you want to discuss now before we close up for the day.
I'm good.
Can you just share means whatever we have covered, like point wise, like we have the syllabus, we have the topics, that this topic we covered this, like means we go to any course, so they will give us the means the distribution of the topics, like that means what is in there and what we have covered, like that. Means I know means the Okta is so vast, and how much we required to go for an interview, and means apart from means you taught us,
Mhm.
we have to read or just like that in the point of interview.
Okay. Maybe we can prepare the same. I mean, like, because the topics are something what you see on the screen, right? Like, if you go to the directory, we have covered all these 7 topics, whatever we have. I mean, the 6 topics. Then if you go to the applications, we have covered these 2. If you go to the security, we have covered everything. Like, now we are left with customization. This is nothing to do with an interview. This is like very basic stuff. Like, these are very self-explanatory topics. If you like, if you want to change the template of an email or something like that, so we'll just go through it, like, in maybe 15-20 minutes, but there is nothing to teach over here. Okay, but and same goes for the
No,
dashboard.
I'm not saying about this Okta application.
Mhm.
Apart from application,
Apart from application, I don't understand. I mean, like, basically we covered Okta only, right? Like, are you talking about like Active Directory or LDAP directory stuff?
yeah.
I mean, why I'm saying, like, I'm because see, I haven't taught, or I have just discussed whatever things are related with Okta over here. I haven't taught those. Like, it would be not justified if I say that I have helped you understand what an Active Directory is. I have helped you understand what an Active Directory is with regards to Okta. How much knowledge you should have with regards to Okta. Active Directory itself, like, a very big topic, just like Okta. Same goes for
Okay.
LDAP Directory. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
So if we go for an interview, so they will
Yeah.
ask question about this topic only.
Yes, that's how it should be. Like, if you are sitting for an Okta interview, you should be knowing each and everything, whatever we have discussed till now, only with regards to Okta, nothing apart from that. Like, I'm not sure, like, is it going to be an entry level job or a mid level job or a senior level job? That will depend on that particular thing as well. Because, if you're looking for a senior level job, then they might, think that, okay, Okta, but you should also be knowing for, other topics as well. Like, because never ever you are going to work with Okta only. But if you are going for an entry level and you have knowledge on Okta, then they won't expect anything else. Like, they'll say that, okay, this guy knows Okta, we'll take him in, and later on, if in case whatever things are required, we'll train the person. So for entry level, the expectations are different. For senior level, the expectations are different. Okay, so that would
Okay.
depend on what type of jobs you are looking for. And but yeah, I mean, if you are going to be mid-level also, then also they won't expect much out of you apart from Okta. But for a senior level, they will definitely ask, then it would become more of an identity and access management interview than Okta interview. Like they'll have 60% Okta interview covered and 40% interview based on your identity and access management. So that's how it goes. But yeah, like
Okay.
all of this definitely we'll discuss also the topics and all whatever we have covered. The only point I have is like the topics is basically on this particular application only. So if someone
Oh,
asks you tomorrow that we've covered or what have you done in Okta, that has to be that we have covered each and every tab in Okta whatever we have.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
no problem. Okay, then yeah, I think we are good for the day. We'll meet tomorrow and we'll start off with the workflows topic and followed by the reporting stuff. Till then, I'll share the PPT with you guys today and you can just have a look and we'll discuss tomorrow if you have any doubts.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Okay,
then
thank
thank you.
you.
Have a good one. Take care.